Evening to all of you and a very, very warm welcome. It is always heartening, and as I have been saying, that this special CXO series that we started 4 weeks back has become more and more special for all of us. And although we are not meeting in person, this virtual gathering every Friday evening is giving a sense of togetherness, and the fact that we have had so much of learning and sharing through the interactions that we've had with all of you is really amazing. Since the last two webinars, as you know, that we have extended this to all our best workplaces across Asia. So we have delegates not just from India, we have people from Singapore, from Sri Lanka, from Dubai, all of them join us. And I know for Singapore, it is almost your dinner time, which happens by the time we end this. So thank you so much for joining us. And of course, the topics have been something that you all asked for. And we started with one on leadership. And this one is again something which I think most of you said that it is something which is a non-negotiable, right? When we look at leadership during crisis times, not that leaders are not doing important stuff at other times, but during the current times, which is now sort of making us move towards the new normal, self-leadership becomes very, very important. And then that was a topic that most of us, got from you. We thought that, the best person to take a session on that would be Andrew. And because he is the global thought leader on the subject. And I will do a formal introduction and invite him in just, probably 3 more minutes. But before that, I had a very exciting announcement to make. I think most of you have already got it on mail, but we have not said the same thing to you in person. So as you know that we have been working with Right Selection for last more than a couple of years, and many of the Best Employer Club members have met him in person. And what we have done at Great Place to Work and Great Manager Institute, we've now collaborated formally and formed this entity. So Great Place to Work along with Right Selection with the sole objective of really bringing more and more value to the community. So I think this has enabled us to really create a platform, an ecosystem that is unparalleled when we look at whether it is learning from best workplaces or it is learning and interaction with global thought leaders, which Right Selection has an expertise on. And they have been, we have of course been privileged to work with the organization since last couple of years, and we thought it was just an incredible opportunity for us to come together. So I would like to invite my business partner, Gautam, who is the CEO of Right Selection, to share a few words before we move ahead. Over to Gautam.
Good evening, Preeti. Thank you for the kind
welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be with each and every one of you here this evening. And as Preeti shared, we have formalized our collaboration together with Great Place to Work. We look forward to co-creating with yourselves, collaborating with yourselves, to providing virtual learning solutions based on needs, objectives as we grow together. And we have an upcoming webinar series that we are launching the partnership with this month with renowned global and regional thought leaders. And so we look forward to warmly welcoming each and every one of you and your leadership teams to attend any of these webinars. I believe there's a slide there just to show what we have in store for each of you this month. And I believe that maybe, is that something that, yeah, that's something we're sharing. And we want to just share that, whilst it's a business platform, we also appreciate our session tomorrow, for example, is parenting in lockdown. So we appreciate we all have a lot of responsibilities, both personal and professional. So we are here to serve you in every way possible, both personally and professionally. So the topics may be business, but we'll also ensure we take care of you personally. And we look forward to staying closely connected. On behalf of Right Selection and Great Place to Work, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gautam. And as you can see, this is a brilliant lineup of webinars that we have for May. And thanks again to Right Selection for us to, make this possible. So we will keep, bringing more of such things to you. But I think without much ado, over to the session for today. So let me take a moment. Thank you so much, Gautam, to introduce Andrew, our next speaker. And then, of course, the stage is Andrew's for you to, really have the session on self-leadership, which is why we are here today evening. And as you know, even his website is selfleadership.com, right? So when we looked at that topic, this was the person that we could think of, and we are so glad that he could make it for this session today. So thank you so much, Andrew. We of course would have loved it if it was in person. Andrew is someone who really likes to, connect very closely with the audience, and that's why he's built in something very interesting, which you will get to experience through the session. So Andrew is a global thought leader. He has been transforming individuals and organizations through his self-leadership methodology, through coaching, speaking, facilitation since more than 20 years. And he has this mission, which I find very inspiring, and only I think someone like him can bring it to life. So he's on a mission to wake people up to live and work with intention and influence so that they can create an impact. And I think just that one statement brings so much of what he believes in and what he can share with us, alive. I'm not going to take much time because I know he wants to share his story of how he got introduced to India. He's of course been working with a lot of organizations. He's made several trips here, not just in India, but across Asia. So I'm going to let him sort of take you through that before he gets into the session. I hope all of you have that link open, the Google Sheet open at your end. If any of you is facing any issue, please connect with Adishwa or Smriti and they will help you. So over to you, Andrew. Good morning and a very warm welcome. Guys, if you can join me in welcoming Andrew Bryant.
Well, thank you very much, Preeti. It's great to work with a great place to work. And also, I'm brought to you by Right Selection and Gautam. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's evening for me. I'm in Singapore, as you can see from my background.
Yeah.
So it's 7 evening, and I've had a snack, so I'm ready to go. So let's take it from here. So
yes,
as you can
go off and leave the screen to you and the people. Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, as you can all see from the screen, this is not the first time I am speaking in India. I've been coming to India since 2003. Here I am dressed very Bollywood with my Brazilian wife in New Delhi. I have visited Mumbai, I've visited Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, Pune, either working with multinational companies or speaking at Indian conferences. In fact, the first time I spoke in India, I think was 2003. I went to India on Singapore Airlines to speak for Singapore Airlines in Mumbai. And I remember the class very clearly because I was dealing with all the heads of departments. And in my class was the head of catering for Singapore Airlines. And when I told him I was British by birth, Australian by passport, living in Singapore, because of the British connection, he said, well, what's your favorite curry? Now, you can all imagine, as an Englishman by heritage, what my favorite curry is. Anybody care to guess what that is? Have a guess in the chat box when he said, what is my favorite curry? Anybody, just to make sure that you're live and awake in the chat box, what's my favorite curry? Anybody? Come on, find the chat box, give us a type. So anyway, I did the session. I wrapped up, went back to the hotel, and I caught the late night flight out of Mumbai back to Singapore. I got comfortably in my seat, put my eye shades on, ready for a short sleep back to Singapore. And then I get that tap on my shoulder, Mr. Bryant. I said, yes, yes. They said, special meal, Mr. Bryant. I said, I didn't order a special. In fact, I'm not hungry. I'll just sleep on my way home. And they said, no, Mr. Bryant, you have a special meal. And they turned up with a silver tureen. And as they lifted the top off, the head of catering for Singapore Airlines India had personally made me a chicken tikka masala. I know it's historically a curry famous for being invented in Manchester in the United Kingdom. Now, no more flying and speaking around the world for me right now, because, of course, we are in times of crisis. We are in this unprecedented time. And I think if we all had $1 for every time somebody in the media has said unprecedented, I think we'd all be very rich. But let's take a step back for a moment and think about that word unprecedented. Unprecedented means that it's never happened before. But if we've been on this planet for a little while, we've all been through various forms of crisis. I can remember SARS in Singapore. I certainly remember the global financial crisis. If your parents or grandparents, if they're still alive, might have remembered the Second World War. In England, there was the Blitz, where everybody was in shelter, stay-at-home mode from the German bombs. And historically, we know that there was a pandemic in 1918, and the worst pandemic was in the 14th century, the bubonic plague, which wiped out 60% of the population. Not a really nice thought. But the reason I say this is to put the fish on the table, as it were. That's a communication expression. If we put the fish on the table, we can cook the fish and eat it. If the fish is under the table, it rots and stinks. And I think what we need to do is put on the table that these are different and difficult times, but we have all experienced aspects of this crisis before. When I'm giving a speech or running a senior leadership workshop, I'm always looking for a metaphor that encapsulates the challenge that we have. And you may or may not know, but it is 50 years since the Apollo 13 flight to the moon, which famously, of course, was a failure because when they stirred the oxygen tanks exploded into space, stranding 3 astronauts. This picture, of course, is from the movie Apollo 13, one of my favorite movies, which I rewatched recently during our lockdown. I think many of us have watched a few too many Netflix shows. But what I want you to think about is whatever your challenge is, imagine being one of those astronauts out there in space, an accident happens and they're literally stranded. In fact, going the wrong way. They were going away from Earth when this happened. And with no oxygen, they had to retreat, as it were, into the lunar landing module and use that as a life raft. And that was designed for 2 people, so 3 of them squeezed into the lunar landing module, and they're terrified, of course. They don't know whether they're going to get home. But what you see, and in fact, NASA has released the footage of this, they remained calm under pressure. And even though they were cold and worried about the carbon dioxide, there's a famous scene where they had to make a carbon dioxide filter and stick it with sticky tape because it didn't fit in the lunar module. But all through this, they are communicating with Mission Control, who calmly says, we are going to work the problem. And I think that really encapsulates leadership in times of crisis, working the problem. The astronauts were having to demonstrate self-leadership. The team at Houston were demonstrating self-leadership and focusing on the task at hand. And I think in any crisis, what we as the followers would want from our leaders is clear, confident, empathetic communication. Now, I'm going to avoid politics on this call, but you could look around the world at various leaders in various countries and you could evaluate the level of clear, confident, and empathetic communication. Some countries have done this very well, and some countries have done this extremely badly. Put yourself in this position. You're sitting on an aeroplane at 41,000 feet. The oxygen masks do fall from the ceiling. Smoke swirls around your ankles. And the captain comes out of the cockpit and says, got a bit of a problem. I'd like you to get into focus groups and we will decide what I should do about the problem. Now, we'd all be terrified if this happened. If there's an emergency, when you hit turbulence, you expect the captain to come on with clear, confident, empathetic communication. Said, look, ladies and gentlemen, it's just turbulence. We're working through it. If you, touch wood, I hope this never happens to you, to wake up in an emergency room and you heard the doctors and nurses arguing over what's the best treatment for you, again, you would be terrified. In these situations, you expect the person in charge, the leader, to have clear, confident, and empathetic communication. Now, today I'm going to talk about self-leadership in times of crisis. And I'm going to share some models with you. It's going to be a pretty intense session. I want to share a lot in a short period of time. But what I need is to understand what your biggest challenges are so that when we get to the Q&A, I'm relevant. I want you to think about this in advance. So if you were to go to the document that we shared with you, you will see that on that document there is what is your greatest challenge, and you'll see under there a little hyperlink. And if you are to click on that hyperlink, it's going to take you straight to a form. You place your answer there and quickly press submit. And then when you've done that, return to the form, because on the form is a number of resources that I'm going to be sharing with you through this program. So if you would all go there very quickly, your biggest challenge right now as a CHRO, as a leader within your organization, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing? So we'll just grab some information into that form and I will be able to see as responses start coming in there and come back to you. So just a moment to think about what is your greatest challenge. Okay. So we are all facing a challenge. Everybody is facing a challenge on every day, really. We always have a challenge in terms of how we are going to solve this. In fact, my challenge today was how to work the technology with GoToWebinar, because my area of expertise or my comfort zone is Zoom. But I found a workaround to enable me to have my slides behind me, right? That's my challenge, and I overcame that. But what is your challenge? And then how are you going to use self-leadership to best face the challenge? Those are our questions. So I'm going to carry on talking. If you are filling that out, please, you can multitask here. Listen to me. Since this is called self-leadership, I thought I really should cover the topic of self-leadership. I've been researching, writing, speaking about self-leadership since 1999. Not the first person to use the topic. The first person to publish a paper on self-leadership was a gentleman by the name of Charles Mance. I didn't know that in 1999. I thought I had invented the term. I went on to research and write a book, well, in fact, two books, one with Dr. Anna Kazan, and that book we published in 2012. It's used around the world on MBA programs, and it has a definition of self-leadership, which is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and your actions towards your objectives. So let's just deconstruct that a little. The practice of intentionally influence. So it's a practice. It's like taking a shower. We take a shower, the effect is not permanent, right? You take a shower this morning, but you can need a shower this evening, or tomorrow you will stink. Intention means we know why we are doing things, and that we have the ability to influence what we think about a situation, what we feel about a situation, and the actions we will take towards our objectives. the core of self-leadership is self-determination. It is the belief and action that we have control over our destiny. I was influenced in thinking about self-leadership by Dr. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankl said, the last of all human freedoms is the freedom to choose our own attitude. Now, at the time that he said that, he was locked in a prisoner of war camp, or a camp for Jews in Nazi Germany, destined for the gas chamber. Now, in terms of constriction, stay at home, limited movement, you can't get any worse than that. So in a crisis, you can self-sabotage or be a self-leader. Now, the self-sabotage happens at all levels. I've been, over the last month, been working with CEO clients who have been melting down. They're task-orientated, A-type individuals used to driving for a goal, and suddenly, like those guys heading to the moon in Apollo 13, the goal is gone. They are not going to hit their targets this year. And suddenly, their whole reality of being, driving task-orientated has gone away. And they've been going through stages of grief, anger and frustration and bargaining and depression even. And so over the last month, a lot of the coaching that I've been doing has almost been, in fact, it has been therapy to an extent. And yet, if you're on that plane and an emergency comes, you do not want the pilot to melt down. And so one of the biggest challenges for leaders right now is you've got to lead yourself so you can lead others. Even in my own field, I regularly get on LinkedIn and do a LinkedIn Live. I stopped doing them for a couple of weeks because everybody suddenly was jumping on LinkedIn Lives and telling you how they were feeling and struggling. And if you're a leader, you have to have a demonstration that yes, you're affected, but that you're not out of control. So self-leadership is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions. And you can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. And this is a very fundamental maxim. You can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. And in times of crisis, we are really testing the competency of our leaders. And it's interesting that often people don't get to the top by competency. They get to the top by confidence and ideology, particularly in politics. Nobody goes to the elections on competency, they go on ideology. Now, in my 2016 book, which was a follow-up to the 2012 book, which is much more of a handbook, there's this model. And this model is an inside and an outside model. In fact, the first book that I wrote, this one, that's the subtitle is How to Become a More Successful, Efficient, and Effective Leader from the Inside Out. And you see in this model, the inside is our intentionality, our self-awareness, our self-confidence, and our self-efficacy. And the outer game is our influence and impact that we have towards our targets. And this shows a feedback loop or a feed-forward loop. If you listen to our mutual friend, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, always talking about feed-forward, requesting how close you are to your target. Now, I particularly want to talk about confidence, because if we're going to demonstrate our leadership with confidence, right, we have to understand what it is. Confidence is knowing what we've done before and what we're doing now. So it's having the awareness that we have skills. And Peter Drucker always said leaders should be playing from their strengths. Now, when I talk about confidence, particularly in Asia, I hit a bit of a wall because in Asia, there is a confusion between confidence and arrogance. People always ask me, can you be overconfident? Or isn't confidence arrogance? Well, I would say this. Confidence is not walking into a room thinking you're better than somebody else. Confidence is walking into a room not having to compare yourself with anybody else. You see, when we're confident, we're grounded in our strengths. Now, it's interesting that the word humility, which is the opposite of arrogance, isn't it? That the word humility comes from the Latin humilitas, which literally means grounded. Humilitas gives us humus, which is dirt, soil. So when we are grounded in our strengths, we can be confident and walk into a room confident in our own abilities, not having to measure ourselves up against anybody else. I was doing a session this morning for Singapore Management University and talking about how you can grow and develop your confidence, because so often confident people without competence get to the top of an organization, whereas competent people who lack confidence get passed over. So one of the key things in developing your talent, in my opinion, is make sure that they know that it's important to project their confidence. In fact, executive presence, which I speak a lot about, is the ability to project gravitas, confidence, and poise under pressure. Now, bringing all this together, I noticed that in the survey of the things that you wanted to have covered is that people also talked about personal mastery. And often self-leadership and personal mastery can be used synonymously, although technically the personal mastery piece is the self-learning piece of self-leadership. And Peter Senge, author of The Fifth Discipline, talks a lot about personal mastery. And he says that people with a high level of personal mastery live in a continual learning mode. They never arrive. And as CHROs, I know that learning and development is core to what you're doing. And if you go back to your document that I gave you, the Google Doc, you will see that I have on that document put a few blog posts there. And the first one is on personal mastery definition and importance to learning. So if you want to click that and open, don't read it now, of course, come back and read that afterwards. But I just want to make sure that if you want to do a deeper dive on any of the topics, that I have made those available to you. So personal mastery is very similar to self-leadership, but very much about the learning, taking that feedback. All righty. So let's look at self-leadership in a slightly different lens, or through a slightly different lens. In my Inside Out model, I talked about the self-awareness. And there is a clear correlation in not just my research, but pretty much everybody's research on leadership, that there is a strong correlation between self-awareness and leadership. In fact, leaders with a big blind spot really can be a problem, which is why we run psychometrics and 360s and all those things to help the leaders to be very aware. The self-regulation part of self-leadership, again, it's very much like personal mastery, good habits, right, of productive habits. I mean, for instance, if you want to be healthy, you need to exercise. So you have a habit and a ritual of exercising. And if you want to go for a run early in the morning, a good self-regulation would be to put your running shoes and shorts beside the bed before you leave. And then we have the self-learning piece, right? And all of this is held together by a context. Now, if you watching this want to improve your own self-leadership, I have some self-coaching questions that you could ask yourself. The biggie is always, who am I? What are my intentions? What am I trying to achieve? And I think this time of crisis has been really interesting in terms of giving people a chance to reflect about what is really important. I was coaching a head of people, which is a CHRO role, for a Silicon Valley software company. And last week we were chatting, and she's working from home. She's on a shelter at stay at home in California. And she's saying, Andrew, I'm really frustrated because, my identity is articulated by the stuff I do. If I'm busy, I feel. And I asked the question, who are you without what you do? And her brain nearly exploded at that point. We caught up just this morning. And she said, that question really got to me. Who am I without what I do? She said, I tried meditating, but then I thought I'd take up a hobby, and I've started home decorating, and there's a big hole in the wall. And it was so interesting how she struggled, that she didn't know who she was without the activity. So self-awareness, self-regulation, and the self-learning, the ability to close the gap. Now, it has been my observation, and all of the podcasts that I listen to, the experts around the world are clearly articulating that what we've been speaking about prior to COVID, the digital transformation, the advent of AI, has been accelerated by COVID. The need for our ability to communicate and work remotely or distantly or dispersed is incredibly important. Now, the other piece of self-leadership in terms is the self-regulation. What are my strategies to successfully achieve my goals? Now, if we are going to have increased autonomy in the workplace, we want people who are looking to have their own strategies to achieve their goals, not people who are waiting to be told exactly what to do. And lastly, we are really thinking about what do I need to know and how am I learning? And we really are in some very exciting times. All of us are on this webinar this evening, learning different ways. I'm not there in person, and yet we found that we can do this. We can do collaboration documents, and we can move forward. So I've got a poll, so I'm going to get some answers. And if you scroll down on that document, on the bottom of that document, let me quickly share that. If we scroll down on that document, there's a section for questions. And so you have a choice. You can either put your questions in the question box, which I can see them popping up. But if, okay, I see questions. See, I've got all my answers of butter chicken curry. There they turned up. You see, I'm learning how to use the webinar. But also, we can put anonymous, people are starting to type their questions here, and that's going to be a lot easier for me to see. All right, so this is another model. Now, I've confused you possibly with lots of models, so let's confuse you some more. If you go back and think about my inside-outside model of self-leadership, that we start with intention, self-awareness, self-confidence, and self-efficacy. By the way, self-efficacy is confidence projected into the future. I can be confident to do this presentation because I'm doing it and I'm confident to do it. But if you ask me to do something I hadn't previously done, I have to think, well, can I do that? Right? The other question is, some people were interested, and I don't know whether somebody had been on my blog and that's why they asked me this. Some people were interested in double loop learning. And this comes back from the work of Chris Agaris, and the concept of double loop learning is incredibly, I'm struggling for words here, beautifully synchronizes with the whole self-leadership feedback or Marshall Goldsmith's feed-forward mechanism. And in times of crisis, we really need this double loop learning. Typically, if we start in the middle, we have strategies and techniques about what we do, and we get results, positive, negative. And a single loop, the most common style of is just problem solving, right? Something happens, we make an adjustment. But double loop learning is a challenge to the assumptions that caused us to make the original action, right? It's more than fixing the problem. It's asking the question, is there even a different way of doing this? I mean, in digitalization, right? You could be asking, what's a better way of processing checks, right? Anybody from the banking industry, that was a question a few years ago, and then suddenly became, well, actually, do we need checks, right? What's a more efficient way to have a bank branch? Well, hang on, do we need bank branches? When I was working in Mauritius for the Mauritius Commercial Bank, as they were expanding into Africa, they were thinking about, well, how do we get plastic credit cards to people? And then they went, you know what? Do credit cards actually need a card? And they bypassed cards in Africa and went straight to digital banking. What this crisis is doing is getting you to challenge the very way you're doing business and to ask that question, what if we didn't do it that way? And working from home, is it possible? Do we need to clock people in 9 to 5? Are the ways that we're measuring productivity the right way? In the past, when somebody turned up at 9 o'clock and left at 7 o'clock in the evening, we thought they were productive. But how many of you here find that with the stay-at-home shelter in place, you're actually working harder and more efficiently? Now, if you're trying to do this and you're bouncing a baby on your lap, maybe not. But I'm finding I'm getting a lot of work done without needing to commute. So double loop learning allows us to do that. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to drop in the chat box. I've got this slide up, but I want to take you back to how I first discovered self-leadership. I was standing at a bus stop in Sydney, Australia in the year 2000. I had gone through a business disruption myself. I was heavily invested in the fitness industry in Australia. In the year 2000, the fitness industry went through a massive disruption. And to cut a long story short, I lost all my money. And so in mid-2000, I was living in a backpackers hostel in King's Cross in Sydney, feeling very sorry for myself. And standing one day at a bus stop, and it starts to rain. And I don't have an umbrella, and so my mood did not improve. Eventually, the bus comes along, and I step on the bus, and the bus driver greets me with, "Isn't it a great day?" Now, my inner dialogue, I'm saying to myself all the reasons why it's not a great day for me, and the temptation to educate the bus driver on all the ways it's not a great day for me. But something about his authenticity stopped me in my tracks. And I kind of mumbled, "Yeah, it's okay." And then I sat on that bus and looked around, and people were happy and smiling. And that's unusual on a bus. And you know, I realized as well that, you know, when you're feeling miserable and everybody else is happy and smiling, those people are really annoying. But then I noticed as we drove into the city that people were getting on the bus and they were all greeted with, "Isn't it a great day?" And some like me were taken aback, and others said, "Yes, it is, John," because John, the bus driver, had his regulars. And I realized there and then that I had framed myself as a failure. And looking and comparing myself with John, the bus driver had framed himself in a different way. You see, he was framed by his route and his timetable. He couldn't drive the bus where he wanted to. He was restricted by a lot of standard operating procedures. But remember my Viktor Frankl quote, "The last of all human freedoms is the freedom to choose your own attitude." John, the bus driver, had chosen his own attitude. He had taken ownership and responsibility, and in doing that was positively influencing the people around him. So as a human resource professional or as a leader, what you want is people who want to take ownership and responsibility and frame them with an accountability around their performance. I don't think it matters whether somebody starts work at 6 in the morning or 10 in the morning, as long as they take ownership for the work and they deliver that quality work. I think a clear element that we're going to see around looking for what we measure in terms of output is not going to be just putting in the hours. It's about quality work. As we collaborate in virtual teams, we're going to be looking for how we set the expectation. Each person responsible for themselves, but accountable to each other. And one of the resources that I put in the Google Doc was a post on leading virtual teams in times of crisis. And so the communication has to divide the word responsibility for and accountability to. Now, in English, there is an overlap with those two. There's a massive overlap. People use accountability and responsibility interchangeably. But from today on, I invite you to do it separately. Now, this slide, I'm just showing you just to confuse you and just to show you that there's so much more I want to talk to you about. And I'll come back to this slide when we have a look at some of the questions if necessary. But what I tried to do a couple of years ago was create a universal model of all the leadership theories. I was speaking on MBA programs about various leadership theories like transformational leadership, path goal theory. And in this diagram here, you can see that it starts with self-leadership, our intentionality, our self-awareness, our self-confidence, and our self-efficacy. And the leader's style and the team dynamics matter, and the culture and the vision of the organization matters. So when I'm consulting to companies or working with a senior leadership team, we're really looking at what is that leader's style, what's the culture and vision. So I'll come back to this because I might need this slide when we come to the questions. But since this is a great place to work webinar, I think we also will have some questions about if we're working from home, how does that change a great place to work? Well, you're still working for an organization. And if you're familiar with Daniel Pink's book on motivation, Daniel had beautifully combined a lot of research around motivation. And people are looking for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so we know it will be a great place to work when you're giving people ownership, and people have to take that ownership in their self-leadership capacity. Mastery is developing your skills, so creating an organization where people can grow themselves. And the last one is that your organization has a purpose. So as we lead into the Q&A, on the Google Doc, I've given you a free gift, which is a download of my 2016 book as a PDF. That's free to you. When you click on the link, either you go to the link, or you can just click on the book. It'll take you to the link. I do want you to answer a question, though. That's your price of entry, just a question for some of my own information. So that free gift is there. It's on the Google Doc. You can get that. I want you to know everything you can about self-leadership because I'm not there to do it for you. But I wanted to go into the Q&A. I've got more content if you want it. But in terms of webinar, I know CHROs, every time I've spoke, they want the models, they want the depth. But now my job's to answer the questions. And I'm going to open up the questions that you've got. And people are asking about getting employees back to the office, lots of questions about health and safety, accelerating change, executing a clear plan. How do I build trust when I don't see most of them and they don't see who they work for? That's interesting, that trust question, isn't it? Right. So I've got these questions here, but I'm going to hand over to our moderators. Have our moderators been checking the box? Are there any questions that have popped up that you really want me to ask? And is there anybody you want to unmute so that I can answer them in person? So moderators,
yeah,
are you there?
Hi. Yes, very
Hello.
much. Hi, Andrew. So I think you can start with the questions on the sheet. We do have some questions here as well, but I think most people have put it on the sheet since you had kind of, put that up early on. And one is about, how do you pass on the message of accountability and responsibility to your team, without really, I think, being, what should I say, like how do you make them realize, like when we said take ownership, how do you make that clear with your team is one question that we have. And I'll move to the next if you'd like.
Well, let me address that. I mean, that's really, really an important thing. Now, it comes, I mean, obviously it's going to be either individual or group conversation, right? The important thing is that you are addressing people as adults, right? I'm a father, I have 3 children. And so with children, you have to be, when they're younger, you have to be responsible for them, because if you're not responsible for them, they don't eat, they don't clean their teeth, they don't do their homework, right? But we can't treat adults like that, right? Unfortunately, many managers, supervisors, and leaders have stayed in the habit of treating their employees as children, right? Now, as kids go through their teenage years, and I've got 2 and a bit teenagers now, and they start wanting autonomy. They want to have choice. Now, the clear lesson that you have to give a teenager is You get the choice, but you get the consequence, right?
Right.
And choices and consequences is really what being a teenager is all about. Now, if somebody managed to enter the workforce and still has not understood that they're responsible for what they think, they're responsible for what they feel, they're responsible for what they say, and they're responsible for what they do, if they haven't taken that level of ownership, they are still operating as a child. And if you're reinforcing that behavior by treating them as such, you're going to have a problem.
So don't
People
spoon
need,
feed, don't treat as a child.
don't treat your staff, but so many managers do, right? So the clear thing is, okay, you're responsible for this, but you're accountable to the following expectations. And the first place I get managers and leaders to look is in the mirror. If you don't have performance, did you set clear expectations? And I showed in the self-leadership model the feedback loop. And I use FIF as a feedback model: fact, impact, future. What happened without judgment? What is the impact of what's happening, what the behavior is, and what the future behavior is. Now, when my daughter Tasha was only 4 years old, all right, we moved into a house with lots of steps. It was, those Singapore shop houses with 3 stories. And I was worried that a 4-year-old might fall down the stairs. So I said, and this is a health and safety issue, right? So I said to Tasha, darling, when you come down the stairs, you must hold on to the handrail. And she said, yes, Daddy. A couple of days go by. I'm walking past the bottom of the stairs. Tasha's coming down, not holding onto the rail. I said, Tasha, stop. I said, what are you doing? She said, oh, I'm coming down the stairs, Daddy. I said, what are you not doing? Oh, I'm not holding onto the handrail, Daddy. That's right. So the fact of the behavior had been established. So then I asked her the impact question. What is the consequence of that behavior? I said, what might happen if you don't hold on to the handrail? Fall, ouch, blood. I said, that's right. You could fall, you could hurt yourself. So what do you need to do next? The F, the future, the new behavior. And she said, I need to hold on to the handrail, Daddy. I said, that is correct, Tasha. Now, here's the thing. I never had to correct that 4-year-old ever again until she was old enough it didn't matter. Now, if I can correct a 4-year-old's behavior by holding her to accountability, by owning her responsibility, what's the challenge? People are saying to me, I can't get my people to be responsible. And I'm like, well, if I can get a 4-year-old, so that if you keep saying the same thing over and over again, either you're not shifting that responsibility, or you have somebody who really is not going to step up to ownership. Okay? So
Sure,
that's the way I explain that.
Yeah. Thank you. And I like the FIF. So I think it's easy to remember. Also saying that set clear expectations and use facts and show the future. There is one more here. And of course, the person has said thanks. So he's happy with your answer. The other one is, which I think in the current times is a challenge which a lot of us are facing, is to say, how do you motivate your team members when I think on one side there's ambiguity, second, it's not probably the best of time for a lot of industries. So how do you keep them motivated? Any tips there?
I mean, it's a great question. So firstly, are you motivated? I mean, this is a self-leadership lecture, right? So, if you get up and say, guys, are you motivated? We have a problem, right? I always look at motivation as an intrinsic piece, right? Dr. Victor Froome in 1964 talked about expectancy theory, and I think it's one of my favorite motivation theories because we are motivated when we expect our effort to result in an increase in performance. Why would we do something if we didn't think we were going to get better at it, right? And so setting that expectancy again, if you can do that, you're going to improve. The second part of that is the increase in performance going to be rewarded? And the third piece of it is that reward going to be relevant to me? So I think the big challenge, and you're seeing this a lot on Facebook challenges, what am I going to do during lockdown? Am I going to learn a new language? Am I going to learn a musical instrument? I don't know. I don't know. But make use of this time to get better, to increase some level of performance. If it's how to do a Zoom meeting, how to today I challenged myself to use a new piece of technology to make this work, right? So I set myself a challenge. right? I got better at it, and then I got the intrinsic motivation. So the question for me is always, not setting goals for people, but co-creating goals for people. What are you going to do to stretch yourself during this period? And it is a struggle, right? Sometimes because you can't go outside, you can't meet people, but that's just a challenge to your creativity. I mean, again, what do we always say to teenagers when they say, oh, I'm bored, Daddy, I'm bored, Mummy? And we say what our parents said to us: boredom is a lack of creativity, right? So if you're not motivated in this period, then you have a problem, because there is a stark reality that not everybody is going to be employed when we come out the other side. Organizations are clearly looking at who is adding value. So if you want some away from fear-based motivation, it is, please demonstrate your value. Make sure when you get on a conference call that you turn up, you're showered, you're groomed, you contribute, because if you're not visible and you're not confident, you are going to be overlooked. And so I would be saying the motivation here is the opportunity. And there is a level playing field. I'm super excited that there is now a level playing field for our distributed workforce, because there's no longer that the proximity bias that you're in the head office. Everybody's on equal footing, and the gender bias and the age biases disappear as well, because everybody has an opportunity to demonstrate. So I think that's very motivating.
Okay, thank you for that. There are a couple more popping up here now that we've said we are taking questions here. One is saying, how do you help your team members overcome challenges of self-isolation? I think we have had quite a few of us who are probably self-isolated, living on their own. Some have had to, of course, apart from access to counselor, I think, which some people, most good companies have done. Are there any other suggestions that you?
Okay, I'm going to answer a question first and then bring this in, because they're linked.
Sure.
Okay, so somebody here has asked, manage business continuity whilst being empathetic with people, right? So we're not all of us, there's a spectrum of empathy, right? In the big five, it's agreeableness, how much we care about other people. And there's a whole bunch of people, in the speaking world will talk about, you need to love your employees, et cetera, et cetera. I've got nothing against love. I just don't think it's a particularly businessy word, right? But so because I have a strong background in psychology, I go to 1954 and Rogers, who talked about unconditional positive regard. So a therapist should believe in the possibility of his or her client to transform themselves. So when you believe in somebody, they feel that belief and step up to that. And there's the Rosenthal or the Pygmalion effect, that when somebody believes in you, you step up, right? So unconditional positive regard. And I think what we really need now from managers and leaders is to have that unconditional positive regard for people. So when somebody's isolated and say, look, it's tough, all you can do is say, yes, it is tough, right? Accept that, right? There's no denying it's tough. A lot of people don't like being alone. Some people, their issue is that they're locked in the house with their spouse 24 hours. And now, now that relationship is stress tested. But I think the first thing is accept the current situation, adjust your behavior so you can advance. So with the unconditional positive regard, we're saying to somebody, look, I guess I know it's tough, but I believe in your ability to work this out. The self-regulation of self-leadership is, look, you might be starting to, eat more, drink more. Some Facebook posts were like, can you recommend a good breakfast wine? Well, maybe you Netflix binge and drink a little bit too much for the first few days, but after a while, the self-regulation is kick in and say, this isn't sustainable. Yeah. I'm going to be here for a period of time, and I need to come out of this, out of the gate. And so I need to put in some good habits, getting up at a regular time, looking after myself, doing a bit of exercise on the spot, find a, exercise with a chair, and make sure I'm connecting with people. Anytime somebody drops me a message on email or whatever, I've basically got a Zoom account or Zoom room open almost all the time. And I just send them the link and say, right? Let's not talk on email. Drop into my Zoom room and let's have 5 minutes. And so
Sure.
quick conversations. So I don't feel disconnected right now. In fact, I feel more connected than ever. This morning I was at 8 o'clock this morning, I was coaching into San Francisco, and now I'm in India, Dubai, Sri Lanka, wherever people are watching it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So next one is a slightly tough one, I think, for all of us. So saying that when a crisis like this, which has significant financial impact, how can we adapt our business model, one, to reduce costs and without impacting the reputation, so not doing something which would be seen as that, oh, this company is doing this, when we know there is a financial impact.
Yeah. Look, I wanted, my talk is on self-leadership. The finances of this, of course, there is a reality. We have humanity and we have economics, and there's a balance between those two. There's always been a balance around economics. If we didn't put a price on human life, all of us would be driving no more than 20 kilometers an hour, because that would reduce road fatalities massively. But we don't. We drive faster than that because there's the need to get to places, and people would go mad if they could only drive at 20 kilometers an hour. But driving at 70 and 110 in various countries increases road fatalities. So somebody's done the math and said this is the value of a life. Right? So a business has to understand that it's not a charity, that it has expenses, and some people need to be laid off for the business to go on. But how that's done, if that's done with humanity, that the first cull is those people that are non-performers, right? In the UK, they put people on furlough. They've used government funding to put people on a lower wage so they can bring themselves back and ramp up. So there is no simple answer that I can give you on a webinar. I would be foolish to do so. But I do think that we do have to realize that the global financial crisis, I saw the bankers lay off all the private bankers. And then 6 months later, they were hiring them all back at a premium. So playing this a little bit longer term and realizing that, do we have a quarter, 2 quarters, going to the shareholders, going to the venture capitalists and going, how much can we do? Because if we scale back too much, we're going to delay our ramp up. And that's the calculation that very smart people need to be making, and not just going, let's cut all costs, because that could, firstly, how that's done, if it's done badly, right? Everybody gets stories coming out of the US, everybody got an SMS, you're fired, right? That obviously is going to ruin your reputation. The companies I've worked with, the how it's done. I mean, everybody understands, right? We're going to take it personally if it's us that gets laid off.
Yeah, I think that's what we've seen with Best Workplaces, right? So it's the how of it, being transparent about what is happening, because people understand. It is not, everyone understands that what are we going through, but as long as we are transparent, we are doing it humanly, as you said, and the how matters a lot in terms of how
clear, confident, empathetic communication. That was my opening slide. We need to do as leaders is to do that.
I think then now we can take the questions on your sheet, Andrew.
Sure, good.
Answer the ones here.
So people have talked about effective collaboration and communication.
Mm-hmm.
So as a self-leader, you're taking ownership of your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, which means that you also take ownership of the meaning that you create. So one of the elements of self-leadership that I teach is really about boundaries. Me, not me. So often when people are under stress, they'll say something, and it might be in a different tone, it might not be well articulated, and the tendency is to react to that, and now we have conflict, right? And as a self-leader, we realize that there's me, my internal world, and there's not me. So the trick to watch communication almost go through to the goalie. The example of this is when you watch 2 people having an argument and you're not in the argument, you can clearly see both sides of the argument. You can clearly see where everybody's coming from. And the trick as a self-leader is to train yourself to not to react to communication, but to observe it. And if we, again, bring back that unconditional positive regard and go, what could they have meant? And if we can take a breath and ask ourselves that, then we can potentially go to them and say, I'm curious, what was your intent in saying that? What did you really want to say? I want to check I understood that correctly. Now, whilst that seems like it takes a little bit longer, it takes a lot less time than repairing a relationship or a conflict. And so as a self-leader, really watching that. Now, the point about collaboration is collaboration comes best from abundance, right? When we're in turf wars and we're worried about, oh, they get the credit, I get the credit, then there's no collaboration. I collaborate a lot. I've written 2 books with female co-authors, and I'm currently conducting a Women in Leadership program with Dr. Tanvi Gautam. We're doing an online Women in Leadership program called Amplify, and Tanvi and I are collaborating because we're both experts in our field, and we both bring out the best in each other. And this program we're super proud of because she challenges me to bring my best, and I challenge her to bring her best, and then the students get an experience. Right now, you jumping in as moderator, right, changes what was a speech, very didactic, to be much more of a conversation. And I think the audiences get more out of that collaboration, don't they, Preeti? So we're role modeling it right now.
Yeah, wonderful. In fact, one of the person from the audience actually kind of said, I agree with what you said, and especially on the 4 C's, and especially when you're doing a courageous conversation. I think doing it with confidence, clarity, all of that. So we also got some affirmation on that from the audience.
Oh, I appreciate the affirmation. And again, the same thing about self-leadership is I don't need it, right? It's nice to get it, but you see, as a self-leader, you're a self-contained unit, right? Because if you're needy of the validation, then you can be manipulated by it, right? We all like validation. I'm a human being. I love a tummy rub, the same as best. But if I go out looking for it, then that puts me in danger, right? I have to know at the end of this webinar that I gave it my best, and if I didn't, how can I improve next time, right? And if we all, train ourselves to have that mindset, we have people who are taking responsibility for that, then we're not in kindergarten anymore. There are adults in the room, and we're running a company, and we're doing good business.
Great, thank you. And do you have more on your sheet?
I don't. I just wanted to see if I had anything else I wanted to say. I think really when you're looking at leadership, you're always looking at your leadership style, the people's motivation, and the environment or the context. So, was it Hersey and Blanchard talked about situational leadership, and they had a 2x2 model. The model, I think, is dated. Ken Blanchard's a lovely guy. I met him. I'm not sure he's still with us, but I have met him. But what I want us to do is to think that in a stable environment where you've got people with high autonomy, you can be a participative and consultative leader. But in this current crisis, when people are unsure, they're untrained, the environment is highly volatile, you may need to be more directive right now as a leader. Hey, look, I understand that things are tough, but these are the decisions we need to make. The worst thing right now as a leader is to delay a decision that needs to be made and make things worse. Right? So, back to that clarity piece. So I just wanted to share that there's so much more that I wanted to talk about. Obviously, I've given the free gift on the Google Doc, which is the book, and that puts you in connect with me. I also put a click if somebody wants me to come and talk to their senior leadership team. There's a link for that. Gautam, of course, from Right Selection can moderate that. I'm on their panel of speakers, but I know that most people are in a bit of a free.
Andrew,
Somebody needed muting.
Okay, there seems to be an echo. Can you hear an echo as well? No?
I can hear an echo.
Yeah, okay.
It's gone away.
It's gone away. Yeah. So this person is asking that leadership is a process. So from your perspective, what do we need to prioritize? Asking powerful questions or guiding, providing solutions as per the situation requires. And you were just talking about situational leadership, so this is something which has
I think I
just
just answered
popped
that
in our
question.
box.
So the answer is both. I mean, I think, good leaders ask great questions. But, my example at the front with the pilot during a crisis is not going to ask questions. We expect he or she to take control of that aircraft and bring us to safety. So this is what leadership is, this is when leadership really matters. When we don't have a standard pathway, when we need somebody to step up. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people who've got to a leadership position because they were super confident but never been tested. And now we're finding out who can back that up with competency. And a few people haven't been able to do it. Some of them have failed publicly. Some have failed privately. So, one of the things that I'm going to say right at the end, I don't know what our gender mix is on this group, but as I mentioned, I'm on the faculty of Women in Leadership at Singapore Management University. Is that we've been saying that women need to step up. Actually, we need to be a little bit more critical on some of our male leaders to say, should they be there? They might have the confidence, but do they have the competence, right? Because women tend to build their competence before they build their confidence. So, I think right now we're looking for very competent people who can be calm under pressure and make the decisions that need to be made. All the time, maintaining that empathy. And that is a big ask. It really is a big ask, but that's what leadership is about. It's not for everybody. Everybody wants to be a leader, but nobody wants the responsibility.
Yeah, and also interestingly, I think during these times you also discover leadership across levels, right? And it does become distributed. When to say that you find when people are taking ownership and you say that maybe this potential was not seen earlier, but it is a great time for that opportunity to someone to step up and take on and take ownership. So that is something I think many of us have seen.
Yeah, thank you for reinforcing that point. And I think we should be sharing that through the organization. The level playing field is what I like to call it. Is a huge opportunity for people to say, hey, here I am, and here's my ideas. So if you've got people who have some thought leadership, some great ideas, encourage them to start putting those forwards.
Sure. Great. So thank you so much. Would you like to put up the link for the self-leadership? I think people have got it on their sheet, but if you want to just see that, that's a link to his book. And thank you so much.
I can do that. So if I go here, I share Google Share. So on the document, there is the picture. You can click on the picture, or you can see there's a bit.ly link, GP for Great Place to Work _CHRO for this particular webinar. Click on that. Answer the question, please, and you get a free download of the Self-Leadership book. And if I scroll up on here, personal mastery, leading virtual teams, double loop learning are 3 resources that I said. And if your organization is looking for a speaker, either for a virtual conference or a virtual leadership team meeting, I have a special for the Great Place to Work team there. So that's all available for you.
Great. That is so wonderful for you to share all those resources. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you everyone for joining us. As always, we'll of course be sharing this with you. We will, it's of course only for your own reference and learning. So we will be doing that. Our upcoming webinars, of course, the May ones with right selection, those we've already shared with you. And we would be announcing our next one on the 15th, which is on self-disruption and innovation, which I think takes on from the self-leadership, which is what we'll be doing on 15th. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thanks, Andrew. Once again, thank you, Gautam, for making this happen. And look forward to catching up with all of you again next Friday, and of course through our webinars through the week. Thank you. Thank you so much.